It is episode 258 of the Derek Diamond Experience podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this special Hugh Jackman-centric edition of the podcast as I remove my headphones here because I'm not playing any more music for at least the live portion of this show. Hopefully you guys, I don't know exactly what everyone's work situation is, and feel free to, chime in about anything Hugh Jackman-centric or just life in general. I'm keeping it kind of loose on the podcast this week. I know here in Florida, we've started our phase 1 of reopening the state. I'm still working from home. For my personal aspect, I don't feel quite safe going back to the office on a regular basis yet. I know I have to go out a couple of times a week to do video shoots and whatnot, but I figure until we absolutely have to, I figure why not just work from home. I think I've personally proven that I can work from home, and if anything, I feel like I've been a little bit more productive. But that's a story for another time. But so this is episode 258 of the podcast, and as I've mentioned, over the past couple of weeks, occasionally that the plans for this podcast kind of changed when this whole pandemic happened, because I had this whole plan in place for baseball season when it would be starting. Well, first of all, for those who might be listening for the first time, every week on this podcast, I discuss some aspect of filmmaking, whether it's acting, directing. I review movies, I interview filmmakers. Anything to do with film, we discuss on this podcast. But so I had a plan in place to essentially have some episodes in the can, and I wouldn't be doing really any live shows until August or September, probably even September. But that changed when the whole pandemic happened, because now it's like I have the time to actually do stuff. And fun stuff like what we're going to talk about tonight, but I did want to get into this story real quick. I've had a couple of people ask me my thoughts on this, and that's the whole AMC Universal controversy. Essentially, what it is, from what I understand, is that AMC Entertainment, which is the world's largest movie theater chain, announced that it's no longer going to play any movies from Universal Pictures after comments made by NBC Universal's CEO saying that they plan to release future movies directly to homes on demand. Now, I don't know if that means all of their movies, if it means just some of them, because essentially what happened was they made Trolls World Tour immediately available, and it earned nearly $100 million in 3 weeks, which is more than what Trolls made in a 5-month theatrical release back in 2016. So, I mean, I understand, and that this is kind of where we're at right now, is that, a lot of theaters are shut down, and I will say this for AMC, they may not survive the pandemic, so they may not be able to complain about this, in the next couple of months, because I don't see movie theaters opening back up until August at the absolute earliest, if I'm being completely honest. Like, all these movies keep getting pushed back. I know that Tenet and I think Mulan are scheduled for July releases, but I would not be shocked if those got pushed back to later on in the year. And I know things are slowly starting to open up now, but even, going to the store today, there weren't a lot of people there. And this is at like 5:15 or 5:30 when it's, prime time store shopping time, because people are just getting off of work and they want to, get something to cook for the night, or they need to get groceries for the week. People are still very reluctant to go out, and even, like restaurants here, I think, are open to 25% capacity, and there's still not a lot of people going out, and I think that's actually smart. And plus, from a business standpoint, I don't know how much sense it makes to open up 25% capacity when you still have to pay. Like, if you're a restaurant, you have to pay cooks, you have to pay wait staff. Does the money you bring in really cover those costs, and food costs too? So things still aren't. I mean, they're never going to be normal again. I've said this the other day to a couple of friends of mine. I think this is like a 9/11 level of when this thing is over, things are going to be completely different. You know, with 9/11, airport security and security in general was never the same after 9/11 happened. And I think that's going to be the case with this. You know, I think people are going to be a lot more cautious about doing things and about going out for a while. And I think that's going to really happen until there's a vaccine developed, and which isn't going to be till next year. So I don't know. I mean, and it's still the same with sports. You know, we don't know when, you know, the NFL is still planning on having their regular season. Now they don't start until September, but you know, what if they can't? You know, we don't know about baseball, and that directly affects me because of my job. But anyway, what kind of getting back to, I'm getting sidetracked here about this whole story, but I think really what it is that the theater industry is going to change. I think you're still going to have your big budget blockbusters like a Marvel movie, like a Star Wars movie. We'll throw Fast and Furious on there too. You know, like big budget blockbusters. We'll still see some of those. But I think we're going to see less of them. I think we're going to see a lot of smaller budget movies. And I also think we're going to see more independently owned theaters that can essentially play whatever they want. And if they want to play, you know, independent movies, like I'll use Uncut Gems and The Lighthouse as examples of those. And I'll throw Jojo Rabbit in there as well. You know, if they want to play those, then they can. You know, I would be perfectly okay if there were a theater here in town that sat 25 to 30 people and it was a small indie movie. Like, I would absolutely be for that. So I think that's really where the industry is going as far as theaters go. I mean, I don't know if AMC and Regal are going to survive the pandemic just because essentially there's going to be no summer movie season. I mean, I think we all kind of know that because Black Widow was supposed to come out last week, and just everything is getting pushed back to either the end of this year or next year. Like, say if theaters open back up in August or September, it's going to be slammed as far as just you're going to have big movies coming out week after week after week in order to counteract that or to make up for the lack of summer blockbusters or summer releases, because that's usually when the biggest movies of the year come out. But even then, are people going to feel comfortable jamming out a theater? I mean, I think when theaters open back up, there obviously will be some type of a seating restriction. So say like you can only fill it to like 50% capacity and people have to sit, 2 to 3 seats apart. I think, things like that could happen. So that's kind of my thoughts on the whole AMC Universal thing. It's all a mess right now. Everything's a mess. Oh, Carlos Longoria is in the chat. Good evening, sir. I actually sent him. So I do have to tell this quick story before we get into really what I'm here to talk about as far as the main subject of the podcast. But so I've been doing a lot more non-baseball content, specifically video, because with baseball not going on right now. So the owner of the Blue Wahoos, the team I work for, is his name's Quint Studer, and he owns other companies around Pensacola. One of them is what's called the Bodacious family of shops, which includes an olive oil store, like a cafe and a coffee shop, and also a gourmet kitchen. And before the pandemic happened, they would host cooking classes every week. Well, with things being shut down and everything going virtual, they decided to go virtual cooking classes. So I've been filming several of those, and it's been a lot of fun because in a way it's kind of me expanding my skill set as far as doing videos instead of just doing strictly baseball stuff. Wade Vatican's in the chat as well. Hello, Wade. Thank you for watching. And I sent, we have a Nerd Cave Retro Discord chat that for those who watch and listen to Nerd Cave Retro, we'll talk more details about that on tomorrow's live show, or it's already happened if you're listening to the audio version of this. But yeah, I sent a and my mother's watching too. Hello. So the thing that the chef made today was like a thick filet mignon topped with caramelized onions and gorgonzola cheese, and this thing was amazing. What sucked is that I had a quesadilla for lunch like an hour before I got to the Bodacia shops, and I think we wrapped the shoot around 2:30 or so, and he gave me one of the fillets to eat, and it also came with like potatoes and carrots as well. But man, that thing was so freaking good, and it was cooked perfectly too. Like when it comes to steaks, I'm medium rare, sometimes even leaning more on the rare side of things. But this thing was cooked perfectly. And then for Cinco de Mayo, I had a street corn, a street taco, and a margarita. So happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone who's watching live. Happy belated Cinco de Mayo to those who are listening on the download. But so the thing, as I mentioned earlier, with kind of figuring out content for this show, I watched this movie last week, and it was actually recommended to me by my friend Jack, and it's called Bad Education. And he's like, you got to watch this movie. Hugh Jackman is fantastic in it, because he knows that I'm a Hugh Jackman fanboy, and we're going to get to that here in a bit. But essentially what it's about is Hugh Jackman plays, and I don't have the characters' names in front of me, but he plays the superintendent of a school in the Northeast. And it's all based on a true story. And he embezzles something like over $4 million from the school system. And it's not just him, but it's one of his assistants, too, that is doing it. And she ends up kind of being we'll call her the fall gal instead of the fall guy for the whole thing. But just things unravel as the movie progresses. And it's actually, it starts out a bit slow, but it looks great. It's shot extremely well. Hugh Jackman is phenomenal, as he is in pretty much everything that I've seen him in. The thing about Hugh Jackman, and I guess this is where we'll kind of get into the actual like discussion on Hugh Jackman himself, because I was trying to think of how I wanted to do this show, because a lot of my inner circle of friends know that really since I was in high school and saw the original X-Men movies, I was a big fan of the portrayal of Wolverine, and I think that was strictly because of Hugh Jackman, and that made me more a fan of Hugh Jackman, the actor. And people were like, oh, you've got a man crush on Hugh Jackman. I was like, yeah, kind of. I mean, seems like a charming guy. I mean, why not? But no, the thing with the Wolverine, and we're going to kind of be bouncing all over the place here on this discussion, but the thing with Wolverine, a lot of people were upset with Hugh Jackman's casting as Wolverine because, for one, he was virtually an unknown. I think X-Men was like his third movie that he had ever done, because when he was in school, he took a drama class, I think his last year of college, and he had mentioned that, and this is all through research. I mean, I've never met him directly, but I will take the article's word on this, but he essentially said that he had more fun in this drama class than he did any, years of university. Like, all years of university combined were not as fun as this drama class he did. And that was when he discovered that acting was what he wanted to do. And the interesting thing about him, and I agree with him in this sense, is that when he started studying acting and started taking more classes and really looked at doing it for a living, he always felt like the idiot of the class, because he always felt like he was so far behind, and everyone else seemed to, take to it so naturally, and he had to work at it, almost twice as hard. But he said that actually helped him throughout his career, because in his mind, he has to really try to be the best actor for the job. And in a way, I think, that kind of, that drive can really help you when it comes to that. Let's see, some comments in the chat. Wade, burger, steaks, I'm a medium guy. There's nothing wrong with medium. Like, medium I can eat. I'm not knocking that. And Wade says Les Mis, yeah. Well, I'm going to get into Hugh Jackman's theater career here in a second. And Carlos Longoria said, I only saw a part of Kate and Leopold. I've only seen bits and pieces of it. I haven't seen the whole thing. But I knew that Hugh Jackman had a background in theater, and a lot of actors do. And chatting with actors throughout this podcast that have done both and did theater first, they actually said that theater helped them to prepare for acting on screen. It's different, but you got to think with theater, you're out there without a safety net. Everything's live. Like, if you screw up, then the audience, chances are going to know it. Like, if you screw up your lines, when you're shooting a film, you cut and you do another take and you keep doing it until it's right. But I think with him, the interesting thing about him is that I've seen several interviews with him, and he seems like one of the most charming people you would ever meet in your entire life. Like, he just seems like a genuinely good person. That's part of the reasons why I'm a fan of his. But if you look at a lot of the roles that he's played, a lot of them have a certain edge to them. Like, you think Wolverine, Wolverine's not really a nice guy. Like, he's not the guy who's going to walk down the street singing Oklahoma, which Hugh Jackman did do Oklahoma. I watched a clip of it earlier today. It's crazy to think how good of a singing voice that guy has. And you think of The Prestige, and you think of Bad Education that I mentioned before. Like, a lot of the roles that he's played that are prevalent, he has that certain type of an edge. Like, he's not a villain. Well, he's played villains before, but a lot of times he's kind of the anti-hero that has that kind of an edge to them. And I remember hearing interviews with him about X-Men, because Wolverine doesn't have a ton of dialogue, especially in that first movie. He actually studied Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry to see, how he did it with, having to really tell the story through your emotions and through your eyes. And I remember years and years ago, one of the acting instructors that I interviewed on this podcast, this was within the first 6 months of me doing this show, he taught a class called Acting Through Your Eyes. And he said, it's like that old saying, the eyes are the windows to the soul. And he told a lot of that story through his facial expressions and through his eyes. And I think, he won people over with that because, yeah, we haven't really seen the X-Men around since, Apocalypse or whatever that last, or no, it was Dark Phoenix. That movie was so bad, I'm still trying to purge it from my brain. But I don't know who or if they'll be able to properly replace that character. That was the one regret of the X-Men, Fantastic Four all coming under the Disney umbrella, is that it happened when it did and not several years earlier. Because you could just imagine this, all you Marvel fans and fans of the Marvel comics and movies, imagine this: Hugh Jackman's Wolverine versus the Hulk. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine interacting with Robert Downey Jr., with Star-Lord, with Captain America, all these iconic characters that we know from the MCU. A Hugh Jackman Wolverine versus Hulk fight would be absolutely sick. I would absolutely love to see that. But I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent here. But and again, if you guys want to contribute to anything as far as some of your favorite Hugh Jackman roles, if you want to throw in favorite Wolverine moments, you can do that as well. Because mine obviously is the entire film Logan. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I think it's one of the best films, period. Because Logan, much like The Dark Knight, transcended its genre of really being more than a comic book film. Now, those two are different genres. Dark Knight's more of a crime drama, whereas Logan had a lot of like Western and like the Last Outlaw type of feel to it. But they both succeeded in doing that, and with Logan, I think a big part of it was due to Hugh Jackman's performance. And they announced going into it that it was going to be his last time playing Wolverine. And I remember I was disappointed when I first heard that, because I was still holding out hope that the X-Men would become a part of the MCU. But after seeing the movie, and I remember this like it was yesterday, when the credits roll and you start hearing Johnny Cash's "When the Man Comes Around," I thought to myself, yeah, this was the right way to go out. Like, now I don't want to see him play Wolverine again, if I'm being honest. Yeah, Carlos says Logan is the best portrayal of the character in my opinion. Yeah, Lucas Sasser is watching. Good evening, Luke. Still hoping against hope for a Jackman Reynolds team up for Wolverine Deadpool. It was kind of clever how they used the whole archive footage from the X-Men Origins Wolverine. I think it was in Deadpool 2 for the post credits. That was hilarious. I mean, that was just like that little tease of the two together, even though they technically weren't. They kind of were in a way, but even a cameo like for Deadpool 3, if Hugh Jackman showed up just for like 5 seconds as Wolverine, that would make my day, because I'm not like, I like the X-Men, but I'm not a huge X-Men fan. But Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine made me a fan of that character, and he was really the highlight throughout that entire series. And like I said, I don't know who they're going to get to replace Hugh Jackman, if they'll be able to do it at all. I think if they do something similar to what they did with the Avengers, I think they should bring the X-Men in slowly and maybe introduce them in like a separate Marvel movie, and then do your X-Men solo film or ensemble film. But I wouldn't even introduce Wolverine then either. I would do I would center the movie around like Cyclops, Storm, Jean Grey, like the OG X-Men. Keep it kind of small, and then for the sequel, you can build it around the introduction of Wolverine. That's what I would do, but that's just my personal opinion. But yeah, I mean, Wolverine is easily his most notable role, and I mean, he played that role for 17 years, if you count the original X-Men all the way up to Logan, because X-Men came out in 2000, Logan came out 2017. So to play a character for 20 years is an accomplishment, and it's an absolute accomplishment. And I feel bad for whoever does replace him, because that's some big shoes to fill. But I kind of want to divert a little bit to Hugh Jackman's theater career, because that's where he became most famous, and that's kind of where everyone was like, this guy's playing Wolverine. Or for me, it was the opposite. Like, Wolverine dances and sings. I found this clip just a little while ago, and I read about it earlier this week when I was doing research for this show. But Hugh Jackman did a stage version of Beauty and the Beast, and he played Gaston. And if you're like, I'm sure Luke would probably know this, because I sent this in our group chat before I started the show, but if you were in a way to just take like some of my fandoms and just put them all together, casting Hugh Jackman as Gaston is perfect. Like, I would, and his performance was great. And I know he did a little bit of that, and this kind of segues into The Greatest Showman, because The Greatest Showman came out the same year that Logan did. Logan came out, I think, in March, and Greatest Showman came out later on in the years, and this was a lot of people's first glimpse into that side of Hugh Jackman as the actor, as far as being, the dancing and the singing, and even, his character in The Greatest Showman had its flaws too, because when I was thinking about how I wanted to do this show, I didn't want to really go through like start with Hugh Jackman's career and then go in like chronological order as far as like, okay, well, he started in Australia and then he became a theater actor and then he moved, or then he, was cast as Wolverine and then did A, B, C, and D. That I felt like that would have been kind of boring. But when I was thinking about doing it, I was thinking, I was thinking about Hugh Jackman, the actor himself. I don't think he's quite on that level of, to me, there's like that upper ear echelon of actors. I would put like Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts, George Clooney, those in that category, where it's almost like when you're watching them act, you're not really watching them for the character. You're watching them because, oh, George Clooney's in this movie, or Tom Cruise is in this movie, or Brad Pitt's in this movie. I would kind of put Leo DiCaprio on that list too, even though I think Leo is a tremendous actor, but I feel like his name carries a movie. Like you put his name on the marquee, people are going to go see it because of Leo, not because of the character. I don't know that I would put Hugh Jackman on that same level. And I use, Tom Hanks as an example. Tom Hanks, and I call him jokingly America's dad, because to me that's what he is, because it's almost like every character he plays is, and I'm not knocking him for this because I love Tom Hanks, but a lot of his characters have the decent human quality about them. And I want to say it's repetitive, but he found the formula that works for him. And I think it's great. I thought he was incredible in Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood when he played Mr. Rogers. But with Hugh Jackman, I think the appealing thing about him is that he has such a variety of what he can do and the type of role he can play. He can play, even though that character had its flaws, but the family man in The Greatest Showman. You have, arguably the most badass X-Men of all, Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman. You have a guy who's training robots how to box in Real Steel. Then you have the theater side of Hugh Jackman. You have the aristocratic magician in The Prestige. And, or the corrupt superintendent in Bad Education. It's such a wide variety, and that's what I respect the most about actors, especially actors like this who take on specific varieties of roles, because I feel like in a way, as an actor, it would challenge you to do something different, to try out, like a happy-go-lucky, type of role, and then do something a little bit darker, and that's what I love about, like picking the brain of an actor is really interesting, and also, hearing their backstory and what they use in their characters, like of themselves, in order to bring those characters to life. Because I can say this from experience. When you write a script, you can script it out a certain way, but sometimes the actors will do things that are completely different than what you had planned, and sometimes it works better than what you had thought. I used the Parker Syndrome for an example. Jesse Hartzog, who played the Zack character, he added a certain quirkiness and a little bit of a darkness to that character, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then, I remember the first rehearsal that we did, as far as, with him and Brittany doing the brother-sister scenes together, and just watching like the way his eyes would move and the way that, he would like hold his hands and rub his hands together like this. Little things like that, and I would be willing to bet that Hugh Jackman is probably that as well, because when you have an actor who takes their role seriously, it's going to make the project better. And there are so many Hugh Jackman roles that I love. I mean, Wolverine would probably be number one. Greatest Showman would probably be my number two. And then Bad Education would be up there. I mean, I know I just saw that movie, but man, it was freaking good. If you like good acting and you like good drama, it's an HBO movie, so you have to have the HBO subscription in order to watch it. But man, it was it's a pretty powerful movie. I know if Luke's still watching, I know he had mentioned that he wanted to see it. You got to check it out. I think you'll love it. Got the burps for some reason. I shouldn't have had dinner right before I did the podcast. I don't know about you guys, but like I have a horrible habit of eating late. Like I'll eat dinner and then 20 minutes later I'll go to bed, and then I feel like crap the next morning. I don't know if it has to do with dinner, but I know I've tried to make it a point of eating sooner in the evening, like around like 6:30 or 7. But yeah, and as far as the future of Hugh Jackman and what I'd like to see him do, I mean, he's one of those actors, and I'm kind of throwing him in that Leo Brad Pitt category. But whatever he's in, I will give it a shot, just because I think he brings a lot of range to whatever character he plays, and that's honestly why I'm a big fan of his. You know, all the man crush, and you know, my friends have sent me on my birthday in the past, they'll send me a gif of Hugh Jackman coming out of the water shirtless saying happy birthday Derek, you know, just to get a good laugh. But it's because I truly think he is a great actor, and from what I've seen, I think he seems like a very good human being. And you got to think, you know, he's been married for like over 20 years now. And when it comes to Hollywood couples, that's unheard of. And I didn't actually know this until I was doing research, but he actually met his wife, and I think her name was Deborah. He actually met her on his first major professional job, which was a drama series called Coralie. Hopefully I'm saying that right. But yeah, and they've been together ever since then. I want to say, yeah, that had to have been the mid-'90s, because X-Men was 2000 and his first movie role was in like the late 90s, which I did watch. And it's my understanding that this is his first movie that he ever did. It's called Erskineville Kings. Hopefully I'm reading that right. Erskineville Kings. Essentially, like he's one of the main characters, but he's not the lead. He plays the brother of this guy, and the whole story takes place, and it was shot in Australia. And it's interesting because it's one of the few movies that you actually hear him use his natural Australian accent. He plays the brother of this guy who, in a way, ran away from home because they had an abusive dad. And they had to have been, Hugh Jackman had to have been, let's see, he's in his early 50s now, so he would have been late 20s, early 30s when this thing came out. So his younger brother essentially ran away to Northern Australia and stayed away for a few years. Well, their dad dies, and he comes back for the funeral, and it's kind of that classic, you know, reconciling with family issues and everything, because their mom had left them when they were both young. And Hugh Jackman's character, whose I think name was Wace, I want to say that might be right, was essentially left to take care of their dad. So it's a classic, you know. It seems like it was someone's like one of their first movies. I don't know who directed it off the top of my head, but I feel like this had to have been like either their first movie or one of their first movies, because it has that kind of look to it. It's not a bad movie. It's a little slow in parts, but I actually enjoyed it. But I mean, you could definitely tell that Hugh Jackman, acting wise, was the standout of this movie. And then who would know that, you know, just a couple of short years later, he would play Wolverine, much to some people's dismay. But yeah, he did it. But all in all, I mean, that's kind of why I'm a Hugh Jackman fan. Like, it's more than just the shirtless pics and the man crush and all that type of stuff. It's because I truly think he is a very good actor. And I really hope, and I've got my fingers crossed, and I don't know what that role will be for, but I really want him to win an Oscar at some point. I don't know what for, but I hope he does, because I think he deserves it. I truly think he's one of the best actors in Hollywood, because when I think of actors, I think of those who can really do anything. Hugh Jackman can be serious, he can be funny, he can sing, he can dance, he can play a villain, he can play a hero. He can do it all, in my opinion. And there's some great videos of him on YouTube from the Tony Awards, like of him, dancing with Neil Patrick Harris, and seeing there was the year he hosted the Oscars, of course, but I think, seeing that side of him was kind of what made me even more of a fan, because still at that point, I only knew him from the Wolverine. But since then, I've watched much more of his stuff, and I will say this: if I were able to interview both him and Kevin Smith, I would probably retire from doing this show, because it would not get any higher for me. Like, when I first made this podcast, and I'm kind of geeking out a little bit about this, but that's okay. When I first started this podcast, I made a list of 10 people that I would want to interview. I did get to do one of those last year when I got to interview Jim Ross, but Hugh Jackman and Kevin Smith are all in the top 5. Just because I always like hearing everyone's story of how they got to where they are, but I feel like his is much more fascinating because he started in theater, he was so good at it, and then he transitioned over to acting, and then became, in my opinion, really good at that. And then for a period, he went back to doing theater, because I know he was doing his one-man show for a while that, unfortunately, I didn't get to go to. I wonder if he's going to do that again when the pandemic's lifted, because I would totally be down for seeing that. There was it was like a world tour, and I want to say he was in like Tampa and Atlanta last year, but it just didn't work out because I had baseball games to work on all those nights. But all in all, let's see. Wade says, much like my opinion of Mark Wahlberg. Yeah, I mean, Mark Wahlberg I would put up there too. I haven't watched Mark Wahlberg in anything in, I don't know how long. But no, Mark, I like Mark Wahlberg. I wish that he would. I wish he would own up to the Marky Mark thing, because it's fantastic. I mean, to me, I get you'd want to be taken seriously as an actor, but maybe as he gets a little bit older, he'll be like, yeah, you know what, that was kind of fun. Also, happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone watching, who are watching live. It's funny because really I didn't celebrate Cinco de Mayo up until I started working for the Blue Wahoos, and we've had a lot of games on Cinco de Mayo, and we were going to have one this year, but now it's the kind of typical, like, yeah, I made street tacos and street corn for dinner, and both of those were quite good. But let's see. Oh yeah, Wade, feel the vibrations. I'd love to hear Hugh Jackman do a cover of that. I think YouTube would explode if that happened, in my opinion. But no, all in all, I mean, I just kind of wanted to do something a little bit different. Like, I've never done a show dedicated around a single person's career. Like, I've done it for a single movie and a single series, but not an actor. And that's kind of it. I do plan on possibly doing more of these. About who, I have no idea, because as I've said before, the content of this podcast is kind of in flux right now. I am going to get back to doing interviews. I've actually got one planned for this week and one maybe for next week. So within the next week or so, we'll be kind of going back to the review/interview format. But I kind of wanted to take a couple of weeks just to do some live shows, because as I've said before, doing the live shows on my own are a challenge for me, because it's tough to carry on a conversation by yourself. It's fun having, someone here to bounce ideas off of, whether that's an interview or a review or something like that. But it's been a fun challenge, and I've really enjoyed the live aspect. And I know it's funny that originally I was gonna just do one live show a month, and now I'm doing it pretty much every week, just because I love doing it. It's a lot of fun, and I enjoy the interaction with this on the morning show over on Nerd Cave Retro. The fan interaction is honestly my favorite part of the podcast, and that's kind of why I'm doing these live shows. But I think that's where I'm going to wrap up for this week's show. I know it was a little bit of a shorter one, but this was fun. It was fun kind of going through Hugh Jackman's career, and I guess kind of airing my reasons publicly why I'm a Hugh Jackman fan. If there's any actors that you guys think that would be good to highlight, definitely let me know. I'd be more than happy to take suggestions. I am going to start looking into maybe once a month bringing someone on to do a discussion like this, kind of like I did with Thomas Carter Rochester when we were talking about Jumanji and CyberCon. Maybe bringing somebody on just to have a fun movie review. And I know that Jason Robbins, my co-host over at Nerd Cave Retro, we've talked about doing this because we've been going through this phase where we've both recently watched the original Ninja Turtles movie. And I know we're going to do a look back on that sometime very soon because it's the 30-year anniversary of the movie. And if you haven't watched it in a long time, definitely do, because it absolutely holds up. Everything from the look of it. I personally enjoy the soundtrack to it a lot. The soundtrack is dated. Like, the soundtrack is very early 90s, but it fits. What more can you say? So I know that's coming down the pipeline pretty soon. I want to do a discussion on the original Back to the Future at some point because it is the 35-year anniversary of that movie. So definitely be doing that. I wanted to do a Ghostbusters discussion leading up to Afterlife, but that's gotten pushed back to next year, so that one will have to wait a bit. But there's some little things I have in mind, coming down the pipeline. So if you guys want to follow me on social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at DDiamondPodcast. If you want to follow the podcast and subscribe, you can check it out on all podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. Just search for the Derek Diamond Experience. And if you don't mind, leave a review. The more reviews I get, the more I become visible to the podcasting public. And thank you, as always, to my close friends, the Unicorn Wranglers, for providing the theme music for the podcast. You can find all their music on Apple Music, Google Play, and Spotify. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Derek Diamond Experience. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a safe and fun weekend, and we'll see you guys back here next Thursday.